Hey everyone! So hopefully if all goes well with the current version of 3.13.1, it'll be pushed to live in a day or so, and there's some cool stuff coming along with it, like ship-to-station docking. But for today's video, I wanted to take a look at one of the other major inclusions, the new Hercules Starlifter from Crusader. So I did want to make this pretty in-depth, so it's going to be a bit of a long video, but it's time-stamped as always if you're just interested in a specific section. Before we get started though, if you end up enjoying the video, please consider leaving a like and or subscribing. I really appreciate it. Now I want to start off by showing off the ship's design, and with the job that they've done on it, it really deserves taking some time to do so. And I just want to say that I'm mainly going to be talking about the C2 in this video, since that's what I have access to, but also because with the way the game is at the moment, it's currently the better cargo ship. Starting with the entry and exit points, this ship has plenty of them. This is really important since as a cargo focused vessel you're going to want to be able to load and unload it efficiently, and the Hercules does not disappoint in this area. One of the main types of cargo that this ship is designed for is larger vehicles like the new Nova tank and the Anvil Ballista, and this ship's rear and front ramps make it really easy to drive onto the ship and then drive out once you get to your destination. Now at the moment this occasionally is accompanied by some explosions, but I don't think this is an intended feature of the ship. Now as great as these ramps are, they are a bit excessive to open up if you're just trying to get a couple of people onto the ship. Thankfully, the Hercules is also equipped for this with a personnel elevator on the port side of the ship that can take you from the ground floor to either level of the interior. The animation for the opening and closing of the safety door is a little bit long for my liking, but I'm glad that this ship has plenty of entry and exit points, unlike the Crusader Mercury Starrunner, which is a bit lacking in that area. Onto the lower level of the ship. On the cargo-focused variants of the Starlifter, which are the M2 and C2, there's not a lot going on down here. You basically just have the ramps and the elevator that we just talked about, along with a ladder that takes you to the upper level, and that's about it. This is actually a good thing though, because it means that you have this whole entire area at your disposal to do whatever you want with, and that gives you a ton of flexibility in what you can bring along in this ship. You can fit at least 2 tank-sized vehicles, a handful of starter-class ships, or a whole fleet of small ground vehicles like Cyclones or Rocks. And at least with the C2, this whole area can be stacked from floor to ceiling with cargo. It has a massive capacity of 696 SCU, and the M2 still has a respectable 522. Now the reason for the M2's reduction in capacity is, I believe, due to its heavier armor, which reduces its lift capacity since there really is no difference between the two on this bottom level. I do find it a bit annoying that they've reduced its cargo capacity for seemingly no reason, and even if it's done for balance, I think they could have accomplished this by just making it slightly slower or something, but still, 522 SCU is very respectable. I'm not entirely sure how I feel on this though, because I understand it would be a little bit lame to have one ship that's just outright better than another, but I think they could have made each have their own benefits without arbitrarily reducing the M2's cargo, especially considering the price difference between the two. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comments though. Moving on upstairs, this main area is pretty cool. This center raised area gives it a very unique look, and I think the way that all of these compartments are slightly curved fits in really well with the Crusader's design style. Starting at the rear of the ship, we have some elements that are mostly cosmetic and are supposed to represent the engines of the ship. These probably won't have much gameplay tied to them, but they look cool, so I think they're a nice inclusion. The center part is a bit bright though. Moving up along the center of the ship, there are 2 walkways where you can cross over the center hump, which contains storage for various things. So most of these compartments are local inventory bins, which are going to be very useful as they continue to move towards a more physicalized inventory system. With the size of these, I can imagine that you'll be able to store plenty of items, whether that be armor, weapons, or whatever ends up being stowable as they continue to add to this mechanic. Just as a reference point for this capacity though, the Novikov armor, which currently has the largest capacity of any armor, is listed as having around 150,000 SCU, and just one of these 6 bins has 2 million. Now I believe these are measured in micro SCU because those definitely aren't the values for full SCU, but with a capacity of nearly 15 times more than the already pretty large capacity of the Novikov per bin, this is a pretty significant seeming amount of storage. Not all of these are storage though, a few of them are inaccessible, and 2 of them are for smaller components that might be able to be serviced in the future, with the radar and life support near the front end of the ship. Now on each side of this main upstairs area, there's a room dedicated to a specific purpose. On the M2, these are the Habitation area and the drop seat room with the armory respectively, but on the C2 we're looking at today, one side is Habitation and one side is Recreation. So here on the starboard side of the ship, there are 2 entrances to the habitation area. Inside of here are pretty much all of the features that you'd want on a medium-range cargo ship like this, and all done in a style that's very similar to what we saw in the Star Runner. That's a good thing though, because I really liked how that ship was still very futuristic looking, but still had a cozy feel as well. So most of the stuff in here is actually pretty much exactly the same as the Star Runner, like these clothing lockers, the bunks that are built into the walls, these toilets with the cool curved doors, and the desks for each crewmate. Really all that's different here is the layout, and I think that this mirrored, symmetrical layout really fits this ship since it's more likely to be used by coworkers on a job than the Star Runner, which is more suited to personal use, so it's kind of nice for each person to have their own space on the Hercules here. Now even though this is an industrial sort of ship, the recreation room on the port side is not lacking. It again has 2 entrances at either end of the room, and this area has a number of cool inclusions, like this massive TV looking thing, and a seemingly well-equipped kitchen area with a spacious pantry and fridge. My favorite part of this room though has to be this booth that's inlaid into the wall where you can eat your meals with a crewmate. I know that the Star Runner is really the Millennium Falcon of Star Citizen, but this little area here really reminds me of that ship. Now moving forward to the front of the ship, we get to the final area that we haven't looked at. So again, just like the Star Runner, the hallway to get to the cockpit is pretty long on this ship, but unlike the Star Runner, they've actually made good use of the space. Throughout this hallway, you have component housings, weapon lockers, EV-8 suit lockers, and it's all accented nicely with these rings of light. I really like this area, not just because it looks cool, but because it's a really good idea of how to make use of this space. First of all, just with how the exterior of the ship is shaped, it was always going to have a long hallway here anyway, so it's nice to see that they've actually made use of this space this time. And even better, the stuff that's placed here is in a perfect location. The EVA suits and weapon lockers are conveniently located right on your path out of the ship, and also important components like shield generators and power units are here for quick servicing in an emergency. This area could have easily been an afterthought, but it's been used really well, I think. Lastly, we get to the bridge of the ship, and it looks a bit empty on the C2 here. This is fine though, because on the M2 there's an extra gunner seat off to the side, and I believe on the A2 there's going to be 4 seats on these main rails instead of the 2 that are here. Again though, in this area we can see a lot of similarities to the Star Runner. The seats on tracks seems to be a Crusader staple, along with MFDs and switches just kind of being thrown all over the place in all sorts of orientations. Unfortunately, you don't get quite as good of a view as you do in the Star Runner, but this is a cargo vessel, so that's not all that important. But yeah, I really like how the bridge looks on this ship. The accent lighting is nice but not overdone, and especially when you're standing in the middle here where you can see the entire canopy wrap around you, you almost forget that you'll be piloting this thing through a narrow slit of glass. So overall, the interior of the ship is really well done in my opinion. They left plenty of space for activities on the lower level, and there's a number of thoughtful inclusions upstairs with plenty of suit, weapon, and general item storage, and plenty of crew amenities as well. Really, my only gripe with the design of the ship's interior is the same as I had on the Star Runner, and it's these door open and close buttons. Now it is nice to have them to be able to control each door and turn on and off all of the different lights, and these ones here are actually greatly improved since the clickable portion of these buttons now takes up the majority of the space instead of how it used to be, but in some of the locations they can still be tough to activate. Like the rear ramp here can only be activated by jumping to hit the button, at least as far as I can tell. But again, these can be adjusted pretty easily in the future to either be able to be hit from further away or just redesigned again, and for a ship this big, this is a pretty minor issue. Now let's talk about actually using this thing. So the C2 I've got here is most definitely a cargo ship, and it's really great at that role. At the moment, it's the best ship for cargo in the game, surpassing the previous best, the Caterpillar, in a number of ways that are particularly useful right now. Now the Cat has its own strengths that I'll mention later, but with the way trading works right now, or at least the way that it should work, the C2 is really the best. I will say though that if you are planning on flying this thing, even for just a little bit, you probably want to swap out that stock quantum drive. All of the other stock components are perfectly fine, but the quantum drive that it comes with stock is really one of the worst drives to exist. It takes forever to spool, and then an even longer time to actually get where you want to go. Besides that though, this ship is really fast to fly, and it has a ton of space. 696 SU is a ton, and appreciably more than even the Caterpillar's already large 576. Unfortunately at the moment, trade is in a really sorry state. This here is me trying to buy anything from Bezdek on Ariel when I was doing some of my testing, and I walked around the ship after buying it to see that I didn't even get enough cargo to fill even one of the Caterpillar's 5 cargo bays. So as great as the ship's cargo capacity is, unless CIG actually decides to fix cargo, which has been broken for months now, you're not really going to be able to take advantage of it, even for hauling scrap. Once we do get to use this ship though, you'll be happy to hear that it's a joy to fly, especially for a ship this large. It doesn't turn exceptionally well, but if you point it in one direction and fire up those engines, it goes really fast. Now this isn't just a fun feature, but actually a pretty useful one. When you're trading, time is money, and a large part of many trading runs is flying through atmosphere. So I wanted to quantify this advantage a bit by comparing the Hercules and the Caterpillar on a very standard run from Bezdek on Ariel to Lorville on Hurston, and to do this I compared 3 portions of this run. And for all 3 I just set the throttle limiter to the highest point and set cruise control so that it would be a similar comparison. So the first segment of the run was the time it took from jumping to Bezdek's marker to actually getting the outpost, since it drops you about 20 kilometers out. Then I jumped back to Everest Harbor both times so that I could quantum travel to Lorville from the same spot, and I compared the time from exiting that jump to reaching the hangars. And then lastly I timed how long it took to reach 10,000 meters after leaving the hangars in Lorville. Now I did only do this once, so these tests aren't perfect, but they should give you a general sense of the speed difference between these 2 cargo behemoths. And the difference between the 2 was actually a lot bigger than I imagined. In each of the scenarios, the C2 took about 55 to 60% of the time the Caterpillar took to fly the same distance. That's a really big difference. Now remember, atmospheric flight is only a portion of the overall run, but still, depending on the trade run you're doing, this is going to be a big difference maker, especially over a few runs. Tying into this though is fuel and fuel consumption. Now I don't really actually want to comment too much on the Starlifter's fuel performance here, because with refueling coming up, CIG is really taking a look at rebalancing how much fuel costs and how big ship fuel tanks are, and they've actually said that the Hercules here is a bit of a test for a potential new direction. So if you've looked at the Herc's capacity, it's actually huge compared to other ships, but this isn't because it's supposed to be the ship with the biggest fuel tanks, but because CIG wants to try out giving ships in general more fuel so you don't have to refuel as often, but when you do it's a more noticeable expense. I'm actually all for this, because I think for one it'll make refueling gameplay more valuable, but also hopefully running out of fuel in the future should only happen when you forget to fill up your tank, and not just because they've decided to give the ship that you're flying an exceptionally small capacity. So yeah, the only thing I really want to say about the massive fuel numbers this ship has are don't look into them too much, because it seems like everything else is eventually going to get rebalanced to be more in line with this, or they'll decide that they don't want to go in this direction, and bring these down to be more in line with everything else. Now do remember that this comparison with the Cat is only looking at how trading is right now in the verse, and right now it's a lot more simple than it's probably going to be eventually. Also, the Caterpillar is definitely a more flexible ship, where the Hercules is really only meant to be a heavily defended transport that happens to work well for cargo running right now because of the massive amount of space it needs to carry out that role. Eventually though, the Caterpillar will be able to take advantage of its many features. This includes the cargo bays that are much easier to load in 0G thanks to the many access points from all of the doors present on the Cat, as well as the tractor beam that'll come online eventually to help move cargo in and out of the ship, and this will make the Cat a great ship for scooping up pirated cargo. Also, another thing the Caterpillar has that could make a massive difference is modularity. Eventually, the cargo bays along the front of the ship will be able to be swapped out for a variety of rooms that will expand its functionality, and while we don't know what these are going to be at the moment, we do know for sure that the Hercules is focused on one role and doing that as well as it can with no modularity planned for it. But in addition to this somewhat unknown feature, we know for sure that the Caterpillar's command module will eventually be detachable, and the Caterpillar has far better computers than the Hercules, which could help it either run data or be more capable if you decide to run the turrets with blades. So yeah, while right now the Hercules is in most ways just better than the Caterpillar for trading, that's mostly to do with the state the game is in right now, and not just because it's an overall better ship in every single way. It's just better suited for the simple system we have to work with at the moment. Although one thing that's definitely better on the Caterpillar is the landing gear. The Hercules face plants more easily than Constellations, and that's saying something. Moving on from cargo hauling specifically, we get to what is really the ship's primary use, vehicle transport. One of the main uses for the Hercules is to fly around large military vehicles, be that the new Nova tank or the Ballista, and being purpose-built for this, it really excels in this role. Again, having the dual ramps makes it really easy to load and unload vehicles, and there's plenty of space for the rated 2 tank-sized vehicles. If you're carrying smaller vehicles though, it's really easy to get your maximum of 3 vehicles out, since you can fit a ton of Cyclones, Rocks, or even Ursas in here. Unfortunately, this feature isn't all that useful at the moment. It is nice to actually be able to haul around a tank or a ballista without having to get out an 890 jump, but even though you can bring those very capable combat vehicles places now, there's still not a ton to use them for. I think the most useful thing I've seen done with a tank is someone using it as an auxiliary weapon for the Hercules by flying around with the front ramp open and shooting it out the front. But yeah, until we get some more ground combat content from CIG, those sort of shenanigans are about all these capabilities are useful for. But hey, it's a lot of fun to stuff vehicles and ships in here, so I think that's good enough of a use case for now. So in terms of intended uses for this ship, that's really it. It carries stuff, whether that be vehicles, cargo, or people in the case of the M2. However, these are military ships, so in terms of their combat capabilities, they're actually surprisingly good. Now, most of this comes down to how defensively capable these things are. They both have 2 large shields, which is a ton of shielding for a cargo ship, even of this size. Just as a reference, the Carrack and the Hammerhead also both have 2 large shields, and those are both known for being pretty durable ships. So yeah, it's going to take a lot of effort to take down one of these things. In addition to that, eventually when armor is more of a thing, these ships are said to be pretty well equipped in that area as well. And not just the M2 with its heavy armor, the C2 itself isn't a slacker with its medium armor. So both of them should be able to shrug off some smaller caliber weapons. And if you just want to look at the current numbers, both of these ships have some of the highest hull HP out of all of the flyable ships. So yeah, these are designed to take a beating. So this part was a big selling point in the original pitch for these ships, since they are military transports, with the C2 being more for routine operations and the M2 for those highly dangerous situations. What I wasn't expecting was the more than adequate level of firepower present in both of these ships. We know that the A2 is going to be a gunship bomber hybrid, but both the M2 and C2 still have a pretty large assortment of weaponry. Starting off with the pilot, the 2 size 5 hardpoints that have gimbaled size 4 Gatlings on them in the stock configuration are pretty sufficient for taking out most small and medium ships. I think a good comparison for this amount of firepower is the 600i, which gives the pilot 3 size 5 hardpoints. So while the Hercules is missing a third of the 600i's firepower, in terms of getting the weapons on target, they're pretty comparable in maneuverability, and you still keep that benefit of having large weapons that have higher ranges so you can keep smaller craft at range and be able to line up shots much more easily. One slight issue has to do with how these hardpoints are located on the ship, which can cause some issues when you're trying to get the weapons to converge at close range. But again, your best bet with this ship is to be taking on your targets at longer ranges anyway. But yeah, I would not go with fixed weapons on this ship, since that would only exacerbate this issue. In addition to the pilot's guns though, the C2 has an additional 2 turrets, each with 2 size 4s, and the M2 actually has 3. The 2 turrets that both the C2 and M2 have are a little bit limited in their firing arcs, being mounted at the rear and the bottom of the ship respectively, and they're also a bit limited in that there's only 1 operator seat for both of these turrets, so you can't have 1 gunner per turret. What helps with this a bit though is the interesting feature where both turrets will attempt to shoot at what you have targeted if they're able to. It is a bit hard to get enemies into both of the firing arcs, but when you do, that's 4 size 4s, which is a lot of damage headed the way of whatever ship you manage to target. As for the M2's extra turret, this one actually looks to have pretty decent firing arcs being mounted on the nose of the ship, although I haven't actually tried one out myself, so I'm not entirely sure how good it is. But yeah, even solo, you can do quite a few PvE combat missions with the ship, especially since most targets you run into are going to have a tough time taking you on with such massive shields. And if you're running cargo and have a co-pilot along to man the turrets, you have quite a lot of firepower to send back at anyone attacking you, especially since the firing arcs of the turrets are the best at the rear of the ship. So yeah, with this combination of weaponry, shielding, and armor, you've got a pretty good shot at defending your cargo in the ship, and even doing some light combat missions if you choose to. So that's about it for the Starlifter. Overall, I'm really happy with this ship. It continues to expand Crusader's lineup of ships, and I'm really starting to like their exterior and interior styling. Also, these are excellent cargo ships with a great combination of capacity, speed, and defensive capabilities. It's a shame there's nothing to trade right now, but when there is, these ships are going to be the best at it for now. And in addition to all of that, against NPCs you can get quite a bit done combat-wise, so if all you have is a Starlifter, or you just really feel like using it, you can pass the time waiting for CIG to fix trade by doing some bounty hunting missions. So yeah, I really like this ship so far, and I'm really enjoying flying it around the verse. But what do you guys think? I know people have a few issues with the M2 since it lacks a few things like a kitchen for what seems to be no reason, but do you have any gripes with the C2? For me, the only problem that's been really annoying is the landing gear faceplant issue, but hopefully they can play around with some of the suspension values to fix that. But yeah, I want to hear you guys' thoughts in the comments. Now if you made it to this point in the video, thanks for sticking around, but I also want to mention that this weekend I'm going to try streaming for the first time, so be on the lookout for that if you're interested. For the stream though, I really want to try and figure out the 890 jumps maximum Merlin capacity, so if you want to take part in that, then head on over to the Discord for details. It's linked down below. Again, with the 3 per person vehicle limit, I am going to need some help filling it up, and as a thank you to anyone who helps out, I'll give you credits to buy a Merlin in-game if you want. Anyway, that's about it. The Starlifters are overall great ships, and I look forward to a time when we can actually use them for some real cargo runs. So if you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and leave a like or subscribe, and thanks for watching.